And we knew it would work. We knew the planter would do it. There isn't a planter made today that wouldn't do it. And I always say, if you can no-till Napanee clay, you can no-till anything.
You kind of have to not constrain yourself to a label too much and not let it be a gospel that thou shalt never put any sort of tillage into the field, but it's a very strong guideline.
I mean, I started heading for no-till 30 years before we did it, because I could see that we had to do something different, and I just had to figure out what and how.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Winning with No-Till. Today we're at Kaiser Lake Farm south of Napanee on the Hay Bay, and I've got Eric and Rob and Max with me to talk about their adventures in no-till farming. And they are a little bit of a twist from the other ones in the series in that they bring livestock into the equation, and we'll talk about that and manure management and such. So to get us started, I'd just like maybe Max take a shot at who is currently involved in the business, and then between the three of you, we'll talk about the journey to no-till.
Yeah, I'm actually, one of my latest buzz lines lately is I'm the son of a farmer, I'm a farmer, I'm a father of a farmer, but actually there's one more who's not here. So Dad's part of the operation, my wife Jessica is part of the bookkeeping and whatnot, and Robbie and his sister Molly Beth are involved in the day-to-day operations as well. We have a full-time hired person, and we have some summer students that help out every summer too. We call upon some professionals when it gets into electrical work, the chicken handling, of course. There's crews that help us out with that, but certainly in the fields, it's us and not much more than that.
And one of the unique things about Kaiser Lake Farms is where it's located, and the fact of your footprint is so solid. Can you talk about that a little bit, Max?
These were old lots developed, at the time of settling, so they're 100-acre lots, but we're surrounded by waterfront. And the county road basically goes around our perimeter, and anything that's on the water side of the county road is a waterfront lot, a lot of homes. There's over 200 homes within a mile of the edge of the farm anywhere. So having said that, the farms were not very attractive for farming in the previous generations, and we were able to acquire all of our land into one contiguous block.
And Eric, can you talk about that a little bit? Because you're the one that sort of pulled that all together.
Well, of course, the basis is that the Loyalists came here 240 years ago, and they spent the first 100 years clearing the land, mostly old-growth forests. Over the second 100 years, an interesting phenomenon happened in that all, without exception, of the smart kids and eventually all the kids left. So there were no family members to take over the family farms. When I arrived here 55 years ago, whenever a neighbor wanted to retire and quit, there was nobody to take over the family farm, and they said, oh, we'll just go up the road and see that dummy, he'll buy anything, and I did. And so that's how we managed to put together, over a period of the 50 years or a little more, 1,350 acres in a parcel. The reason the smart kids left is because this land, most of it is silty clay. The only bits that aren't are glacial moraines, which are good when it rains and drouthy when it doesn't. And so when I came here, my brother, who was on the home farm over in Prince Edward, just over there about 9 miles away on the open lake, had done some tile drainage, and he said, you need to do some tile drainage. So I started the year I came here doing tile drainage. And for the next 50 years, I and we spent every cent we could beg, borrow, or steal, and buried it. And that was the step one in making this stuff farmable on a continuous basis.
And so, Eric, one thing that you and I have talked about in the past, and Max, we've had the conversation too, is you're not doing so much now, but still a little bit. But before, you had strawberries and other things on the farm that allowed you to better interact with the public around. Maybe talk about that a little bit, because that's so important these days.
Well, there were two reasons for that. One was we're part of the community, and we did for a number of years. We had community barn dances here. The strawberries were a reaction primarily to the high interest rates in the 80s and early 90s. We needed more cash than we were generating. And that evolved into sweet corn as well, a small acreage. We never had more than 10 acres of sweet corn, but...
So you're not really into that now. Does it make sense to go back into that now with the way the the area is changing again? You must be getting a turnover of
Yeah.
all the people along the lake.
The problem with strawberries was that demographics changed.
Yep.
And so people no longer picked large quantities to freeze and make jam. They wanted to get both husbands and wives worked and they had kids, so they had summer activities that required time and attendance, and soccer and baseball and softball and so on. And so it just slowly died after about, I don't know, we did it for close to 20 years, but the traffic got less and the amount picked got less and less, and it just became non-viable. Would that change now? No. We're not in a location where we could get pickers easily.
Right.
We're too far from town, and so I don't see it as an opportunity to be a commercial, to be a viable commercially. We still do sweet corn. That's mostly Max is doing, and sell sweet corn at the road, but it's not a big item. But that and the barn dances and the farm tours we've had all contribute to our presence.
Max, can we talk about where this farm started and how we got to the point now in terms of the adoption of no-till in what would traditionally be not soils that people would think about no-tilling?
Well, a lot of that started before my influence, for sure.
Yep.
Back in the early 80s, Dad had figured out pretty easily that the more activity you had on the dirt, the tougher it got, and it tended to respond negatively. And we've seen impacts of even driving really high flotation tractors across the field. The one planting tractor we run at like 4 and 5 psi in the tires, and that still shows up in the corn. So lessening the traffic, getting the water out, building that organic matter in the surface, in the soil, the old root structures, the biomass, it just sort of became obvious that these things had to progress forward. So left the mold board, went to a chisel plow, went from 8 inches to 4 inches, just kept reducing and reducing. And so the migration into no-till was slow and evolutionary, and to the point where in 2000 we bought the first no-till corn planter, and actually it was intended to be pulled behind a cultivator as the previous one was, but it was so much heavier it pulled the cultivator sideways on the hills and things like that. And we figured out pretty quickly we got to get that cultivator out of there, and then the planter did just fine. And even still, over the next 10 years, we figured out we don't need those roll coulters anymore. The double disc openers are cutting in. What I've observed in, I'll say, 30 years is the tilth of the soil has changed so much that it crumbles and granulizes so much easier. You can get through there. Dad talked about the sweet corn. I plant sweet corn with a 1978 International Cyclo 400, and I plant from the 1st of May to the early July. I'm no-tilling into what was wheat last year, cover crop manure in the fall. I do nothing to the surface except go in with that old corn planter, and I go drive across the field on the 10th of July and get out and look at the row unit, and that zone is just crumbled and nice. And that's like clear evidence that how we're managing the farm and the soils and our activities there are having a very positive impact on that seed zone and that surface preparation.
So can we talk about the soil types and slopes that you deal with? And so in terms of the no-till, and what are these soils that you're dealing with? Because they're not sort of a regular soil that a lot of people are used to.
Well, of course, the glacial moraines, which there are 2, there's a larger one at the back and there's a small drumlin at the front, are the organic matter in those soils is lower, 2.5%, as opposed to 3.5 to 4.25 in the rest of it. For example, for years I ran a rotary hoe, and so that I would use it after soybean planting or corn planting to facilitate emergence. And Haven't used it for a long time,
I don't know, man.
20 years.
The last time we used it was actually we put it on the back of a tractor with a small herd spreader on the front, trying to establish a cover crop in the corn. So we actually were using it to establish a cover crop, not to facilitate the emergence of
Okay.
the planted crop.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways,
And so, as Max said, we've changed this soil structure to surface. They got away with it for 200 years because they were mixed farms. They plow up 10 or 12 acres in the fall and plant oats and seed it down to red clover and timothy, and that was forage and pasture. Yeah, I grew up on a farm, but when you're 17, you do what your dad tells you, and you don't look for reasons. And then I went off to Royal Military College for 4 years, and then 4 years in the military, and then came back to farming. And so really, I had no knowledgeable. I could drive a tractor, I could run a plow, I could run a disc, a cultivator, a seed drill, but those are irrelevant to managing this soil.
Right.
And so I had to learn, and I went everywhere I could and learned to learn everything I could. And as Max said, we got that new planter in 2000 and 2001, having realized that we couldn't do what we had been doing. We didn't try no-till. We just did it. We 100% no-till in 2001. Corn, soybeans, and wheat, all with that same white planter.
last year's soybean harvest, the ground was so phenomenally dry at harvest. We actually, as soon as we finished planting wheat, we irrigated. That wheat came up. The rest of the wheat came up a week later after we got some rain, and so that's as dry as it gets on the surface. And honestly, those cracks weren't that bad, and you could still break that apart. You could get a shovel in if you wanted to.
Yeah, we've just changed the soil structure. I remember 2 years ago, back in one field back in front of the layer barn, we were a little late harvesting corn. We were into November, and there was some water on the surface, and we didn't make ruts. All we did, all you could see were the cleat marks from the combine. It didn't cut in at all because the soil has the structure to carry the load. Yes, we use low pressure, large volume tires and all of those things. We've been there. We went in that direction after a really land stewardship came along, and that's where we really started the transition. Before that, we were doing things like putting clover into winter wheat, and we could see the benefit of that. It was, like Max said, it was an evolution. It wasn't a revolution. But
Can we talk about the
when we
slopes?
switched to no-till, we didn't try it. We just did it.
Understood.
We knew it would work. We knew the planter would do it. There isn't a planter made today that wouldn't do it.
Can we talk about the slopes on the farm, because there's a significant drumlin here,
Yes.
but it's not like, it's a small part of the overall farm footprint. Much more of it is like this. Maybe talk about that a little bit, Max.
Yeah.
It's continuous slope in every, mostly towards the bay, but somewhat towards the Bay of Quinte on the other side. So as much as it looks flat, nowhere is it ever really flat, and so there's usually some kind of surface flow. But the significant slopes, I mean, like you say, the drumlin, even the front of the moraine at the back, those are areas of concern more so because of the speed and how quickly it can flow down those slopes. Keeping any measure of cover, actually, in my opinion, the best cover we have to prevent wind and water erosion is the corn stover. Those big leaves impact or catch the raindrops better. The corn stalks hold the snow better. And when you have, what I believe is when we have the depth of snow on the ground, the melt happens from the bottom and it happens very slowly. And I like the corn stover better. Green cover is good. When we have we have a couple of spots where we have some channels that happen in the field. And if we're planting wheat, we tend to go back over those. With the no-till drill, you can plant willy-nilly if you want to. And so a couple of them will plant the whole field systematically with steering and then go back up those channels just to add a little bit more.
Yep. Okay. Rob, can you talk about the crops that you grow here on the farm and the rotation that they follow?
I mean, the rotation begins with corn. It's a very high demand crop. I mean, we have a pretty typical, for the most part, corn, soybean, wheat rotation. We try to modify that every so often, just adding different crops. And over the past few years, we've been adding about an eighth of the typical area of sunflowers to the rotation every year, and that usually replaces either, would you say, soybeans or corn in the rotation?
It used to be soybeans, now it's more in the corn spot.
Yeah, just as we figure out where it fits. And we usually plant that along roadsides, again, just for the sake of the neighbors because it looks nice for everybody.
My last visit, there were a couple of cars parked over there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then lastly, arguably after wheat, is a cover crop, which helps. It goes in after the manure and is cultivated in. That's the only tillage we do here. That's the big exception, and that does a lot towards tying in all those nutrients in the manure and helping make them more ready for the corn the next year. And then that just we do spray it with glyphosate usually, and then whatever doesn't get killed off will get killed by frost.
And so as the farm is transitioning with you and Molly coming in, talk about the change, because you've got the poultry, talk about the change in the feeding, because you used to produce all the feed here, but you guys made a decision to change that.
Yeah, it was kind of a decision across the board, but for the longest time we'd been making our own feed with an on-farm mill, and that system had been there for several decades. It was starting to get old, and it was starting to not be economical to do it on a small scale anymore, unfortunately. And so eventually, before that, it was kind of nice to say that we had a nutrient cycle on the farm because we were using a lot of our own crops towards that. And not that we aren't anymore, because now that the hatchery is producing our feed, we still sell back corn and wheat to them.
And so all the corn now and beans, they go to that place for marketing, or is there excess that goes off not associated with the feed side?
So,
Uh,
sorry, go ahead.
so only a portion of the corn that we harvest so far has gone towards the mill. We just started doing this in the past year, I'd say.
1 year ago.
Yeah, a year ago. And I'm not sure how much wheat we've sent their way.
The soybeans for the longest time have been pretty much straight cash crop.
Yeah.
Chickens can't digest soybeans raw. They have to be
Understood.
roasted or milled or whatever. So that's been treated as a cash crop. The wheat and corn, we tended to sell off the excess
Yeah.
for a long time. But with the relationship with the mill at the hatchery, they'll bring in a load of feed and typically take a load back. And it's been primarily the corn. Corn's half or more of every chicken ration in the province anyway. So that's a pretty easy one for them to accommodate on a regular basis.
And this change in terms of the long term, as you and Molly sort of get more involved in that, it just makes for an easier day. You don't have that piece of the equation to have to worry about.
It did change a lot of things, for the most part for the better. Yeah, it leaves us with a lot more time to just do other things around the farm, address things that have needed to be addressed. At the same time, like, it was something that was a regular part of the day for a long time, and just with any change, like, you kind of find yourself missing it at first, even if it was necessary and
Okay.
you had wanted it beforehand.
Is all the sunflowers going for the cover crop mix, and what other crops are you guys growing for that hold back for cover crops?
In the early spring, before anything else, we will plant some field peas. 5 acres of field peas or more is enough peas for us to use in our own cover crop mixture when we harvest them. The sunflowers were kind of started on a bit of a whim. Somebody suggested that our soils would be a good fit for them, or they would be a good fit for our soils, I guess. So we tried them. The first year was a phenomenal crop, and I thought, this is great. We'll do this every year. 2 years later, it was an abysmal crop, but we were kind of stuck with it. And so mostly they get sold to a local farm supply. They bag them up for backyard bird feeding.
Okay.
And he has a need for so much a year. We don't supply all of his need as it is. We keep back some for the cover crop. We hold back about 1,500 pounds. We put a barrel in each spreader load, so they become part of the cover crop mixture. But it's a cash crop, and it's a decent cash crop, and it's also kind of a fun one.
So with the 3 generations of you, I want you to each answer this question, and it comes back to why be a no-tiller. And so what I'm saying is that a lot of people that are into no-till, they have a philosophy that that's why they want to be there. So from each of your standpoints, why are you a no-tiller, Eric?
Because we had to be. But it's a simple answer. We couldn't go on doing what we were doing. It wasn't working. The corn responded poorly to even minimum till. And if there's tillage in the expression, there's nothing conservation about it. Even your footprint will have a negative impact on the soil. The only way you can get across this farm without any impact is to fly over it. It was a no-brainer.
And so that's sort of the mindset aspect, right? Like you knew it in your gut. And
so-
Max, as the next generation, why are you a no-tiller?
It'd be nice to say we got 5 acres of no-till beside 5 acres of conventional beside 5 acres, and we can quantify it. We can't do that. And we sort of did try a long-term tillage plot back in the 80s, but at some point you just give up and you stay with it. One thing that it's obvious to me to see is we're on the field as early or earlier than anybody else, so it's not holding us back at all.
Okay.
You always look at the crop in May and June and think, man, I drove by that cornfield closer to town and it looks so nice, the bright green against the dark brown, whatever, and ours kind of looks a little rough. But at the end of the day, when you're pulling it off and you see the crops and you see the yield, and we didn't buy a plow, we didn't have 3 tractors running in the spring, we got 1 piece of equipment, 1 tractor, 1 person. So we've cut the people down, we've cut the iron down, we've cut the diesel down, and in the end, the yield, we're right on. We're I'm not going to say we're the best in the county because that would be the wrong thing to say, but we're not in the bottom half for sure, and we never are. And when I compare us to the rest of the province, even the wheat yields, the bean yields, and even the corn yields, they stand up just fine. And there's a lot of variation in what people are doing across the province, and it's not costing us. And in fact, we're saving money on the front end and making it at the tail end. It's really, you can't pencil it away on a balance sheet. And yeah, there's a time factor. There's the fact that we get out there in the fall, we take the crop off and you park the machines. There isn't mud up the side of the tractor. There isn't mud between the duals. There's no ruts in the fields. We don't have to fix ruts because we don't make them. It works for us. It's easy time. The dollars make sense. The end result, the yield makes sense. I can't see changing it. Yes, we compromise it every 3 years with the manure, but that's also planting a crop. And it's also
that's a give and take.
It's a give and take. It's also our one time in the rotation to do any leveling that we got to do. If we've had a tile fix, there's a hole there that we got to try to squeeze, level in. So there is a bit of a compromise and there is a give and take, but even that cultivation's shallow. We're staying out of the root zone and we're letting that biomass accumulate. We're letting that soil diversity and the healthy soils, talk about soil life and worms and all the rest of it. And I don't know why you'd want to go backwards.
And one of the first comments you said when you started that statement is that it didn't look as good compared to some of the other crops that you saw from tillage. But again, the same thing with cover crops that we leave over winter. Nature has always been sort of chaotic and violent, and we as farmers have tried to make it simple and consistent. And I think that's a paradigm thing. And when I see it with my biostrip till guys up in Huron County, like it looks crazy to go into winter like that, except that's their mindset now. Anything that they don't see that looks like theirs, it bothers them. And so we need to change people's thought process of it doesn't have to be black going into the fall, it doesn't have to be smooth going into the fall, that we win with the complexity of it.
Yeah.
So Rob, is you coming on and taking into the parts of the management of the farm and stuff? What's your thoughts in terms of no-till?
Yeah, so the farm went no-till in 2001, is that correct? I was born in 96, so it's really easy for me to say that's all I know, but also like Dad said, I have an experience working off the farm and tilled land that wasn't tile drained, and between everything that these two have already said, I don't have much reason to, leave it or try something else.
Mm-hmm.
To that end, for the future, I do have ideas for how to modify the system and maybe change different things about it. One thing I've had on my mind recently, just because of the end of manure season, and I just spent some time out in the field spreading manure. I'm pulling around this big heavy tanker, putting down all this weight in the field, and then we spread the manure and it's cultivated in. We, I don't remember too well because I was so young, but we did try incorporating with the real ones, and it didn't go well because of the feathers.
Oh, right.
So that's a big hitch, and spreading chicken manure is you can't really incorporate it because of the feathers. So I have ideas for going into the future. I've looked into technologies like composting and anaerobic digestion, but those themselves are big investments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the big thing is that for 2 decades or more, driving that big tanker through the field and cultivating worked. And that's the biggest reason why we still do it.
Understood.
So I think for the mindset that you need in no-till, you kind of have to not constrain yourself to a label too much and not let it be a gospel that thou shalt never put any sort of tillage into the field, but it's a very strong guideline that has a lot of basis to it behind it.
All right. Awesome.
And so far as the manure goes, it is essential to maintain the organic matter level. And I've done organic matter soil tests for 25 years, and we haven't increased it, but we haven't decreased it.
So I just want to quantify that a little bit because I don't want to discourage others around no-till, because you said that manure, it has to be, but and then when you were saying that, are you talking about it in the context of this soil type? Because other people in no-till are making it work and stuff. Just any comments on that, Max?
Well, yeah, shit happens. It has to happen. I think that it's not just NPK,
Right.
right? And if all the plant needed in its entire existence is NPK, yeah, you could grow it in water, right? Or you could grow it hydroponically. There's all the other things that have to happen that be there, all the trace elements, the organic matter,
The biology.
the biology. I mean, we know that there's a lot of activity between the plants and the microbiology in the soil, and in terms of maneuver or mobility of nutrients and stuff. And you got to feed it all. And just like humans, we can't just simply live on bread and water. We have to have a diversity of food in our diets. So does the plants, and so does the soil.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about cover crops a little bit. And the way I've set this up is talking about the cover crops and then adding the manure into it. So in terms of the time that you've been no-tilling, have you been cover cropping that entire time?
Oh yes,
And before.
we were cover cropping back in the 90s, primary or 80s,
Probably
long
80s.
before, but we weren't doing it in
We
an
didn't know,
organized fashion.
we were cover cropping when we started cover cropping.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. And then I met Dr. Joe Clapperton at a Innovative Farmers Conference. I happened to be the program chairman that year, and had heard about her somewhere, and she was with Ag Canada at the time at the Lethbridge Research Station, so I knew we could get her without expense. So I got her invited to the conference, and when we were there, one of the things she said to me in a discussion was, corn, soybean, and wheat is not enough diversity. You need more diversity to feed the soil life. Well, hell, that was the first thing I'd heard about soil life, but that was part of my learning experience. And so on the way home from that conference, Max and I were discussing it, and we were already growing a few peas in the strawberry operation just for extra thing for the customers, so we could plant a few peas. So we plant peas, and what else can we do? And so we ended up with, we've tried different things over the years, but we're down to about 7 or 8 species in the soil life. Why variety? Every species will function differently with the weather that you got that year. So if you have more than one, you're never subject to, because you're planting in August, for God's sake.
Mhm.
You don't plant things in August, but we're planting cover crops in August after the winter wheat. And so the more diversity you can put out there, the more successful you will be. And the primary goal, back to what I said at the beginning, was erosion. That's the primary goal for that particular cover crop. And it does, as Max says, you can't do one thing without having a whole lot of side benefits.
So maybe Max, talk about what, I got the picture up here of when you were doing this last summer, and sort of what's the things that go into the spreader and how do you make that mix?
So yeah, well, I'll back up. There's no short answers, right? I mean,
Right.
but the first years it was just straight wheat. A lot of it was volunteer wheat that blew out the back of the combine, and to some extent we used to just turn the air up and intentionally blow a little more seed out. That was a cheap spread, an easy way to do it. When we got into the multi-species stuff, there's guys who put stuff in the manure tank and spread it with a manure tanker. We came up with this. We got an old fertilizer spreader from the local crop input supplier. It's a 4-ton spreader. And so that's where we mix it. We throw a little bit of our own wheat from just having harvested it. We keep it in the overhead bin. And we'll add in peas that we've grown, sunflowers that we've grown. And then we've bought bags of sorghum, sudan grass, oilseed radish, tillage radish. I usually am able to get some barley locally that was left over or bad germ or something that we throw in there. And then on top of that, any corn seed we have left over from the spring, we'll spread that out. I know it's going to take 8 or 9 spreader loads to cover the acres, so I just grab a little bit each time, hoping that I have enough for the last load. Soybeans too. So in that picture, you can see a bunch of soybeans that went in because we had a lot of soybeans at that time. So everything gets mixed in there, and we actually use a 3.5-inch auger and a cordless drill to just reach in and just stir it. We've seen over the years, if you don't do that, the first pass across the field is pure wheat. Mm-hmm. And then you get a little bit of this, and you get sunflowers over there and peas over there. So stirring it means it's more uniformly spread. It's still not perfect, but we're not trying for perfect.
You're not really growing a crop. You want something green growing in that landscape. You don't want it planted like a crop.
Right. And we want the diversity, and it's our 4th, 5th, and 6th crop in our 3-crop rotation, mm-hmm. right? And it gives us that diversity. And Dad talked about erosion control. As the guy who drives the sprayer all spring, covering it intentionally is far better than letting nature cover it, because I don't want foxtail to build up a stronghold. I don't want the velvet leaf
ragweed
or the ragweed. We plant this cover crop and get a good take on it. We know what's out there, and it's easy to control. Everything in our mixture is frost controlled. We've had buckwheat. The buckwheat's a good one too, but man, if you see blooms out there, you got seeds next year. You can't stop it fast enough. We've had other things that didn't kill easily or would survive the winter. Now you've got something that you planted and it's now a weed in next year's corn. And so that's how we arrived at it. It took a long time, and things have gone in and things have gone out.
The other interesting thing is Max puts the mixture in the morning, and he goes out at 8 o'clock in the morning and spreads 40 acres roughly, that thing, or a little more, whatever the size. And Robbie's out there at 8 o'clock with a manure spreader, spreading it over top of it.
Yep.
And by noon, because we're using low volume manure, we're only putting 1,800 gallons to the acre, whereas dairy and hog manure, they're talking 5,000 or 6,000 gallons. It's not wet. And so Molly's out there at noon with a cultivator scratching it in so that it's not on the surface very long. And like I said, that reduces the smell. You don't lose the ammonia and nitrogen, and you're not subject to the next hurricane delivering it to Hay Bay.
Now, have you guys thought about, so when do you plant the cover crop versus when the wheat comes off?
Right after.
Okay. And have you thought about planting the cover crop or spreading the cover crop and letting it grow up a bit so that it's green and photosynthesizing, and put the manure on there without having to incorporate it?
No,
No, so we don't want to not incorporate the manure.
Okay.
We've talked about that a bit. The ammonia on the surface would largely get lost.
Okay.
Because if you allow it to dry on the surface, you're going to lose half of it or more.
Even if it was going into a green standing crop?
If it's laying on the surface and
Christine
dries,
Brown, she'll tell you.
it dries off. And drying is water leaving, and water leaving's taking ammonia with it, right? So, no, we want to incorporate it. And it's not just planting the cover crop. We're also tipping the wheat stubble in. We're also mixing in, we've chopped most of the straw, so we're stirring that in. And scratching the surface, we were probably cultivating 2.5 inches deep, right? There's enough dirt rolling that we're mixing everything in, but it makes for an opportunity to do some leveling, to tip the wheat stubble. We tend to cut the straw a little high. So you got 6 or 8 inches of wheat stubble sticking up. That'll still be there next year if you don't stir it down in. And we see that where the corn stalks are still there after a year of soybeans and after a year of wheat, we're tilling in corn stalks too at that time. So if it's laying on the surface, it's going to be there a while.
Okay.
Yeah,
And did you terminate this, or is this the way it comes out of the winter?
So
both.
it'll all frost kill except the winter wheat.
Right.
But we don't want, we tend to be planting a little early, April 20th ish.
Understood.
So if you wanted to kill the wheat in the spring, you're going to be planting green. And if, in our experience on our soils, that's going to lead to slotting. If we can kill the wheat in the fall, so really the glyphosate is only needed for the wheat and it kills easily. But it's also shadowed by some of the other crops that are up above it.
Yes.
And so we'll have killed 95% of it. And there'll be some green spots in the spring. But that residue that's there has broken down so much that the no-till planter with no coulters, minimum row cleaners, slices through there. The hairpinning's not an issue because what's there is so brittle and dry and thin, the planter just goes through it.
Okay.
And so that contributes to it. Yes, there are people who plant green, but they're planting green into a specific crop. Usually it's cereal rye or things like that, which tends to be very stemmy and vertical. And when you get through that, you can get through that with the row planter without that hairpinning because it's not laying down, cutting across it. You're going through it standing. And there's some functional differences there.
So we've talked a little bit around the tillage aspect, and I've had this question out to all the people in the series, and a lot of them think that they need it for soil fertility, moving it sort of to avoid stratification, stuff like that. But Rob, where is the one place, or where are the places where tillage is used on this farm?
The one regular spot where tillage happens is the incorporation of manure, which Grandpa said is as soon as possible after it's spread, ideally within a few hours, so like the same day. But that's just a cultivation, about what Dad said, 1.5 to 2.5 inches deep to just turn the soil over on top of the cover crop seed.
So it happens only in that wheat stubble is the only place that you really do it.
Yeah.
Now, have you done tillage as you've sort of reclaimed some of the forestry land and stuff like that, right? Or after you've tiled or something, and maybe you haven't done that for a while. Do you go in to level it up a little bit?
Yeah, so definitely after tile, you got to level those trenches down, breaking out, even ripping out trees leaves holes, and you got to get over it and work things in. I remember a few years back, I think it was 2012, 2013, we had acquired a piece of land, and it was some heavy clay. And those tiles are running on 30-foot centers.
Just maybe talk about what that implement is and what kind of shovels it has on it, how deep you run it.
So I think 3 or 4 years ago, I came across this one. It was a Wilrich XL19, 22-foot cultivator. It's a 5-bar cultivator. Nothing fancy about the cultivator. What I don't like is the mulch harrow tines on the back. They're not quite aggressive enough to level out the shank pattern. And the only reason that plow is on the front of the tractor is just to give a little more traction. When you get those big fat low pressure tires on there, they don't pull very well. They don't give you a lot of pulling traction. The tractor has duals on it that year, but we have big singles that usually go on it. So that was just counterweight for the purpose. But
And it's funny that you would say that, Max, because in this scenario, in terms of the traction you're talking about. If it was tilled ground, you'd have way more traction. But when you've got unconsolidated no-till soil that you're on, that's why that's happening to you.
And
right?
chopped straw.
And chopped straw, right?
and
Making it
manure.
more slippery.
And a little manure
And
that
manure.
can get sticky at times.
Yep.
Yeah.
The tractor we use this year is the newer Puma, and it has
Okay.
duals on all four corners, and it pulls like a locomotive. So it's a lot better than the big singles.
Okay. So the manure story around here is a little fun in how you handle it. But Rob, you're the manure man here, so
Yeah.
talk about it a little bit. What's the manure? How much are you putting on? When are you putting it on?
Yeah, so we have an annual quota for 30,000 layers, and I guess right now about 100,000 pullets. And together they produce, what would you say, about
500,000 gallons.
oh yeah,
Really,
half a
that
million
much, eh?
gallons of manure. I was thinking more tons or pounds, but same thing. And we're putting out 1,800 gallons an acre. That's our goal, 1,800 to 2,000. And there are 350 acres of each crop per year. So minus one large field, we usually miss one of the fields near the front of the farm because that would have been all pasture land, and it's not as desperate for nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus from all that pasturing.
How important to all of you? How important is manure to the system? And you kind of emphasize that, Eric. But
I can't say it wouldn't work without it, but it works a hell of a lot better with it.
okay,
Like I said, I've read innumerable multi-person, I don't know what you call them, reports.
Yep.
And the conclusion at the end of all of the reports, without exception, is that without organic amendments in certainly in Western Europe and in most of North America, you cannot maintain organic matter without organic amendments,
Okay.
manure.
yeah,
As the guy who's running the business right now, I'm looking at the dollars and cents. And the good sense of manure is that it's worth, just in N, P, and K, multiple times more than it costs to spread it.
okay,
It's a byproduct of the egg production, as usually a byproduct of any animal agriculture, but it's a huge value. And when you spread that over the land and spread it well, I remember Rob Sake from Saskatchewan challenging one year. He was on his annual speaking tour that winter, and he said, I'm challenging you to use as much nitrogen as possible. He didn't want us to apply as much. He wanted us to use whatever we applied. And so the concept was use it as much as possible. So we're using it as much as we can in terms of spreading it as uniformly. And Rob talked about our goal. Our goal is to cover as much of that wheat ground. So every acre gets it every 3 years. So using it as well as we can, spreading it as well, means that we are not buying commercial fertilizers. We buy nitrogen for corn, nitrogen for wheat, starter for corn and wheat, no potash, no phosphorus. I mean, once in every 10 or 15 years, we might target some lime or something to do some leveling of pHs and stuff. But the manure is the prime and key nutrient source in the cropping system.
and through the no-till and the incorporation, that makes that more available to be able to count on that for the crop.
That's right.
Okay. Just carrying on with the manure a bit, I promised them something fun. And so, Rob, you seem to be the main guy in terms of manure application, but it
Right.
seems like your dad reserves the next thing for himself still. I'm not sure if you try that or not. But Max, maybe talk to this a little bit, and then we'll get Rob to talk about spreading it.
So liquid layer manure is not common, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Rob talked earlier about the feathers and distributing it. Splash plate spreading works, but agitating. So that manure goes in there over the span of a year and comes out in a week or 3 days. Then we do have a screw agitator for the back of the tractor to try to break up the surface and stir it up. But even still, it gets thick, and it gets thick suddenly at the bottom. And the calcium that's fed, the large granule calcium, has precipitated out somewhat, sometimes more than others. And it'll end up in the corners or berms in there, or it just stops flowing. It just gets thick. It gets 10, 12% dry matter, and it stops moving because that calcium's heavy. And so years ago we came up with, we used to have ramps and we would roll it down the ramp into the pit. That actually became a little bit dangerous and touchy. You had that old tractor. That's a 1969 165 Massey. So that's pretty deep. That's right at the front end. That's probably the first day I've been in there, or the first hour, because if it gets much higher, the shit hits the fan, and then it's everywhere. It's hard on the alternator for one. I end up with splash marks all over me. The window's open, but I usually close the cab because the bar tires splash it around. I end up with a lot on me, but do I reserve it for myself? No, I'd gladly give it up. But Rob's driving the tractor, and so he's busy enough just coming and going. There was a couple years in there where I did both, and before that, Dad drove this while I spread. So there's a migration, and in a few years, Rob will get to enjoy that part too. Or Molly's out cultivating, so she can't come in and out. And I certainly wouldn't want to put one of my summer students in there. And honestly, that old tractor's a bit of a handful.
And how much time do you have to be in there? Like once it gets down that far, for the rest of the time until it's empty, are you in there?
I don't have to be continuously moving, but I'm in there for the last half day. So it takes us about 3 days to spread this 280,000 gallons. We get down to a certain point, and Rob says, "Okay, it's not moving. I need you in here."
Okay.
And I start going, and the first hour I'm pretty busy, and I'm stirring while he's out spreading. And then it gets to a point where I come to stop and I wait, and he comes back, and as soon as he starts to pump, I start moving, just create waves to the pump and keep it deep at the pump. And so it's on and off for about a half a day.
Okay.
The pump is in a 3 foot deep
Well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that you just keep filling the well as it gets lower and lower in the barn, and we can take it right down to the bare floor.